My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are delighted to have with us Lori Sackler, who will be talking with us today about the second edition of her book, The M Word. Lori, I want to get started by asking you, why did you first write The Money Talk, and why did you think it was important to have a second edition?
Yeah, that's a great question. But I first want to congratulate Charlene and Bev on the work that they do. I really am so impressed with how you really connect with your audiences and help to educate parents on important topics just like this. So thank you for having me. For many years, I witnessed families struggling to have successful and productive conversations around money, or they just avoided the topic altogether. And what I also discovered is that families will make decisions oftentimes reactively without thinking through all the options and consequences and without talking to the family members who will be impacted by them. And then, inevitably there's a breakdown in communication and trust. And what I have seen and what research shows, there's a loss of family harmony and potentially money. So, I wrote the first book, in 2013 to sort of provide a set of guidelines and help people understand why it's so difficult and why it's so important. And then, of course, the M Word Journal is a workbook for people to sort of follow through. And then, of course, fast forward to COVID, and now we have, a post-COVID world, and, where the needs for these conversations are even greater. And at the same time, we're seeing a generational shift in the workplace, generational transfer of money. And, if you don't have these conversations, there's a real, potential of loss. There's a 70% failure rate in transferring money across generations. Breakdown in communication and trust is at the heart of these failed transfers. I see it in all transitions that people go through, not just transfer of wealth. And of course, this book is designed to kind of really help people get through these difficult transitions and in a successful way so they can keep their family and their money intact.
Thank you, Lori. That is really important. So I think about my dad at our kitchen table doing the family budgets, and he was such a good money manager, but never once did he engage any of the four of us kids in that conversation. Why is it so hard in a family to talk about money, and why is it so important?
Well, it's a big taboo, and there's a lot of reasons for it. It's an object of threat and control with most people. I mean, it's partly family history, gender differences. There's a whole host of them, trust and control, and the family history. We see this play out where there are families that have the skills to do this, but for the most part, most families just don't, and it's just a reoccurring. Generational transition of that difficulty. So what we're trying to do is kind of break that cycle and help people have these tools. Because look, your father what's interesting is you witnessed him as a good money manager, right? You saw that, but he did not convey to you what he was doing or how he was doing or why. And those are the things that parents need to get on board with to help kids become more financially literate and get them to a place where they can have productive conversations.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you would say that. I think, again, my dad didn't pass on that knowledge, but my daughter took a course when she was at UC Berkeley on money and finance, and it just lit a fire in her, and now she loves it.
It's interesting. I see the generational differences. The greatest generation, 1928 to 1945, right? And then you have the boomers. I mean, it's difficult for the boomers to have these conversations. But what I'm hopeful about and I'm impressed by is the millennials. They seem to be much more savvy about why this is important. They want to have these conversations. There's plenty more support in the media. There's lots of articles that even the millennials are writing. So it seems to be much easier for them, and they're really interested in the topic. So it's not uncommon for a millennial to say, "Mom and Dad, talk to me. I want to hear about your plans." And of course, particularly as parents get older, there's a need for those kids to use those skills, have those skills to have those conversations.
It's really true. And, parents, whoever is online with us here today, I want to say Lori's book it's not a huge book. It's really accessible. It's really well written, and it's easy to read.
Oh, thank you. I worked on that.
I know you did. So Lori, again, what are some typical topics that require families to engage in these kinds of money talk conversations?
So the topics are going to be informed by the transition you're going through. And I identify five, right? So changes in financial circumstances. It could be you get a new job, you're going to make more money, or you sell your business, or you could lose a job, or have a financial reversal. So that's a time and place. And then, of course, we talk about marriage or remarriage, bringing families together. That's a transition. Retirement, dealing with aging parents, there has to be lots of conversations about that. State transfer is a big one as well. So, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that people have the skills and the ability to cross all those transitions. And of course, let's say it's marriage. Maybe you're getting married for the second time. And you have, not only do you have to talk about your assets and liabilities, transparency and disclosure should be the main focus, but you're going to want to talk about how are you going to merge finances? You're going to keep them separate. What are your values and goals? How are you going to handle the children? I mean, there may be disparate family cultures, different money personalities, and we see this. When you bring two people together, they have different histories around money, and that can create conflict. So yeah, so the topics will be informed by the transition that you're going through.
All right, that really makes sense. And boy, in this day and age, emerging families is so common that money often trips them up, doesn't it?
Well, look, money is central to everyone's life or
Yeah.
lives, right? And if you don't kind of figure that out, you're going to have a difficult time talking about a lot of things, right? Because it's so central to everything. So yeah, and it's not so easy. I mean, on my show and through my book, I interviewed a lot of different, therapists and psychologists, and they all agreed that this was a topic that, even if you're contemplating marriage, you need to have these conversations up front. Yeah.
Absolutely true. Well said. So Lori, do you want to talk to us about the 5-step process that you recommend people engage in for a family money conversation?
Right. So you first want to what I call identify the transition you're going through, right? So I just mentioned a few because that will inform, the topic. I talk about preparing the inner landscape. That's trying to figure out what are the factors that are interfering with your family having conversations. I mean, is it control and trust issues? Is it the family history, different money personalities? What about gender? I mean, that's a whole nother topic. I mean, men and women have, different, their brains function in different ways, and it impacts how they think about money and money decisions. So you want to figure out what are the pieces of the puzzle in your family, what's interfering with you. And then I talk about preparing the outer landscape. That's where you want to figure out how to do the talk. And I call it the what, who, when, where, why, and how. It's like if you're going to go through a major presentation at work or you're interviewing for the life-changing job, you have to prepare. And, this is important. So, what's the transition? What are the topics that you're concerned about? Who needs to be a party to this conversation? What family members are going to be impacted? When is the best time to have it? You certainly don't want to do it on Christmas vacation or middle of a stressful family emergency, right? Where is the best place? Probably a neutral place is not going to bring up a lot of baggage. And why is it so important? Is it because, mom is starting to decline? Is it because I'm thinking about how I'm going to educate my kids? How are we going to, maybe apply for aid or think about creating a trust or getting other members of the family involved? Those are reasons to have conversations. And then, of course, the how are you going to have this conversation? And there, I try to spend quite a bit of time on that because, the how to avoid conflict, because when you talk about money, oftentimes, people, will break down, they'll go into their inner child, they won't be as adult-like as you want them in terms of the conversation. So that's a very important piece of the puzzle as well. So that's preparing what I call the outer landscape. And then asking for help is the fourth step. And that to me is the most important. I mean, you, Charlene, you're trained as an educator, right? And you know the importance of when you're dealing with a child, that child might need extra help. Maybe the child needs a therapist. Maybe the child has a learning disability, right? Well, when you're dealing with money talks, And by the way, the reason you bring a third party in, it's a professional who has the skills, the knowledge, knows how to handle these things. I think the same thing applies to serious money talks. And so asking for help is a very important piece of the puzzle. I mean, it could be accountant, a trusted accountant, an advisor. It could be a financial advisor that you're close with. It could be a family member that everybody trusts, but ultimately it's got to be somebody who has the skills and the knowledge and understands the personalities that can pull this off. And then the last one is what I call repeat as necessary. So, going through this process of transitioning through whatever you're going through takes time. And it's whatever, if you have a child who's having some special needs issues, you don't expect this to be solved overnight, right? You've got to explore the issues and have multiple conversations and bring in professionals, et cetera, if you need them. So yeah, so I say repeat as necessary because it's going to take time. And when I'm dealing with clients, I don't expect them to decide to do what I'm recommending overnight, right? I try to plant seeds and then have multiple conversations. So it's sort of the same thing with when you're trying to persuade people, get people on board to do the things that are necessary. Yeah.
Well, it's so true, Lori. If our kids are having a medical emergency and they need help, or if we need help with some other kind of issue, we know what to do. But so often families sort of muddle through the money part, don't they?
Well, they do because that's the easiest thing to avoid because it's so, it's so difficult to talk about. And it brings up all kinds of emotional. There actually is an interesting reason for that. I'm hoping your audience won't be so shocked by what I'm going to say, but money is as hard to talk about as sex. Okay. And there's a reason for that. There's an evolutionary instinct in all of us. We react pretty quickly to things when we trigger our amygdala and our, fight and flight response. And so what we found is, at prehistoric times when men were the hunters and women were the childbearers and the gatherers, women would offer themselves. There was no medium of exchange like money. So women would offer themselves in exchange for food for their families, and men would entice women into sex. And so, because of these deep evolutionary connections between money and sex, they're equally uncomfortable to talk about. They're unconsciously linked, and they're both associated with a fair amount of feelings about manipulation, anxiety, anger. There's a lot of emotions that come up. And so, you have to understand sort of the deep-seated reasons. It also has to do with the language and the culture and how we've all, never really had a culture where this kind of open conversation takes place, right?
That's
But
true. There's always a power dynamic, isn't there?
absolutely. And trust and control is all part of that power dynamic. So, and it's very obvious when the word money comes up. By the way, money comes from the Latin word moneta for warning. I mean, so it's not exactly got a derivation that makes you feel, pretty good when you're in the conversation, right? Yeah.
All right, Lori. So here, this is a good one. Um, are we all destined to repeat our parents' money mistakes?
Yeah, we actually are part of family history, all of us, each one of us. We are influenced by generations of behavior patterns, and dialogues that get repeated through generations. You can actually create what I call a money graph, where you can track money personalities in your family across generations, how you use, acquire, and manage money. And they're pretty deep seated. So, in order to avoid making these mistakes, let's say you had a father who was a big spender, right? Maybe even a gambler. I mean, that was the message you received. Most kids receive messages without awareness and consciousness, right? That have probably come through multiple generations. And so how does one deal with that, right? The first thing is to be aware of that. The awareness is very, very important. And then to make a conscious effort. I call it, changing the mobile, right? Having to change that mobile by changing your behavior pattern, particularly with money. You can change the dynamic of that family history pretty profoundly. Yeah.
All right. So do you think that couples, for example, of any sort should have a money talk before they get married or partnered?
Yes, it's fascinating. I have a number of millennial clients, and I love the fact that they want to have these money talks. And I think my generation, I'm a boomer. It wasn't such, we didn't talk, well, first we didn't have any money, right, to begin with. But it wasn't something that we sat down and talked about how we were going to budget, how we were going to pay bills. It wasn't the practical thing to do when you're in love, right? But quite frankly, it's a very important conversation to have. And I find that the younger generations who have lived through divorce, have lived through the Great Recession, they were shaped in ways that boomers weren't. And they realized the importance of full disclosure more so than previous generations, having more transparency and figuring it out. How you're not just the practical stuff, but what are your goals and dreams? What do you value? What are your values? Because everyone brings unique values around money. So when you enter a marriage, these are conversations to have. And what I find is the people who are willing to have these conversations, they actually have a better marriage because that kind of openness translates into other ways. How we're going to talk about the kids, how we're going to deal with, grandma or mom and dad who are getting sick. I mean, there's definitely, you set the tone and the behavior pattern for the family by having these talks. Yeah.
Boy, that's such good points, Lori. As you know, so many of the people who have teenagers are also dealing with elderly parents. And
Correct.
it's a really stressful time in any family's life.
Yeah, so boomers were referred to as a sandwich generation
Yeah,
early
yeah.
on, right? And I was raising my kids and putting them through college when I was taking care of my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, their finances, their health, etc. And I think that's where I learned to have money talks because I had to approach them in ways that we could have dialogue on issues that came up. And so yeah, but within families, it's not always so easy, right? So that's part of the reason I wrote this book and to give people examples and ideas and some ways to deal with it. Yeah.
All right. And I'm going to ask this next question for my son, who has an almost 2-year-old. When should a parent start teaching their children about money?
I usually say around 10 when if you have a child that's developing, in a reasonably good way, obviously growing up and learning lessons and what I find fascinating also is I'm in the New York neighborhood, right? There is financial literacy in middle schools now, even in elementary schools. And I remember when my kid was growing up, he was given a project to put together a budget for traveling around the world. And he and his friend, they were 10 years old at the time. They put together that budget. They called up to find out what the flight would be. They even orchestrated a bus to pick up all their friends. I was afraid they were going to start committing some credit cards. But the point is, it was an exercise where they could learn. And so, when you have young children, you can obviously when the kids are going through whatever instruction they're learning about literacy in schools, you can mirror that at home, or you can create a dialogue at home about that. And oftentimes I find the allowance, very basic stuff. Give your kid an allowance. That's what I did with my children. And this is what the responsibilities you have to do for the allowance. These are the ways you can spend your allowance. And you start to give them an opportunity when you open up a savings account if they take on part-time jobs. My youngest son became a snow removal professional. He and his friend built a little business in middle school. So we were busy going to the bank and depositing money. And the point I'm making is my kids, one kid just told me the other day that I was the example of how to save, that I've always been a saver, and I showed them. So the best way to teach your kids, because regardless of what you say to them, they're going to learn by what you are doing, right? And if there's an inconsistency, that's going to be a potential problem down the road. But if you set good examples around saving and using and how you acquire money, you'll see that the kids will learn a lot and they'll develop nicely and with responsible values around money management. The parent is the biggest influencer on this. Yeah.
I read an article in Business Week yesterday about a 3rd-grade teacher. Maybe you've heard about her. And her TikTok has 23 million views.
Oh my God.
She's created a classroom where the kids all are part of a financial system. They get charged rent for their desk, and they can get passes, financial bonuses. There's somebody who's like the banker, keeps a little book about what everybody owes.
Right.
Many kids come from homes where money is a struggle. And
Right.
This young teacher is adamant that her kids are going to learn about finance.
You know, I spoke a few years ago to a national organization of teachers devoted to financial literacy in middle school and high school. And I was so impressed with what they're doing. And I think that teacher should be applauded because that's one of the most important skills she'll be teaching that kid.
Yeah.
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 So yeah, it's good to know that this is really, look, when I was growing up, we were learning math and we were learning English. There was no financial stuff going on in the classroom. But I think the world is different, particularly since the Great Recession. I think that teachers have become much more enlightened in the whole academic world, the importance of preparing your kid before they turn 18 on money management skills that will help them in life. And, and when they go to college, obviously, those who go to college, this is a skill set they need to use when they're in college as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And better that they know before they get there.
Correct, correct.
Lori, so this is a question that gets parents often stuck. How much should you tell your children about your finances? We've recently done parent forums where some parents have said, my kids ask me how much money I make and I don't want to share that. What's your take on that question?
Well, yeah, that first of all, nobody wants to talk about what they earn. That's an American no. There are some cultures where it's not so, it's not such a taboo. But yeah, my take on that is you want to start talking to your kids about your finances when they're adults and they're ready and able to process the information in a mature way, right? Every kid is different. What I tell parents is not to wait until there's an emergency.
Hmm.
Whether there's a emergency surgery or a healthcare crisis or something, literally you want to be able to start helping your kids understand your finances in ways without there being a stress around it. And what I say is, you don't disclose everything all at once, right? You might want to start with, well, we just redid our wills, we got our estate plan updated. You might talk to them about, let's say this is an adult who's out of college, is working, you are going to be a successor trustee or a successor executor, and talk to them about those roles and start to educate them about the roles they might play down the road. You also want to share with them, what documents you have in place, right? I mean, what I find is that when a parent starts to decline, when they really start to feel like they're going to need help, that's when they really start to open up, right? When they start to feel, or when a friend has died or gotten sick. But yeah, you don't just talk about what you're earning. You got to put everything in context. And by the way, I guarantee you, your kids have a pretty good idea of what you're earning by the lifestyle you are leading. So that may not be the most important topic to talk to them about. More importantly, let them ask you questions about, what, maybe when they get older, what does the estate look like? In fact, if you're an adult, it's probably helpful to know from your parents if you're in the will and what that might look like, because you have to do your own planning, right? And you might want to engage your advisors as well. So it's tricky, but it needs to take place in incremental ways. And of course, earlier is better. And it's also based on how responsible and how willing and able your kids are to process that information. I mean, some parents don't want to do it because they don't want to. They want to avoid their kids being spoiled, or they don't want to disincentivize them. But I see so many families where the kids have learned that hard work is valuable, finding your passion in life and working at it is joyful, and that the money is not the pure object. They can handle that information well. So I think you have to be very sensitive about your kids where they are as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So, Lori, we're about to launch a brand new neurodiversity speaker series. And one of the speakers that we were careful to include is an attorney who specializes in trust and financial planning for kids with special needs or
Right.
neurodiversity. So my question to you, and again, this is one that I know you care about, is what do you do if one child needs more help than another?
Yeah, I see this in my practice every day because, your kids' economic outcomes are dependent on their education, the career choice they make, and the partner they end up with in life, right? And ultimately, everyone in that family, every sibling's going to have a different economic outcome, right? And
Yeah.
so And parents want to be fair. I really think they do ultimately. But the problem I have is um, you don't want to you want to try and leave your will, whatever your assets are, in a fairly equivalent way. Because if you don't, there'll be resentment, there'll be anger, and it can impact the family dynamics after you're gone. If you want to, if you have a kid who has a need, it's better to help them while you're alive, right? The other kids are going to know about it. But then obviously there needs to be a dialogue to avoid the resentment. And I think that's really critical. I mean, I did a speech not too long ago where I talked about this topic, and the woman comes up to me and she says, my father didn't leave me anything, but I was okay with it. And I said, well, that's great. I mean, that's really good to know. But my question to you is, did your father talk to you about the fact that she mentioned she had a special needs sibling? Did he tell you that he was not leaving you anything because he felt a certain responsibility to the other child? And she said, oh, of course he did. And I said, well, hello. That's sort of why it was a lot easier for you to do. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're giving to one child during their life and not to another, you could do a makeup provision in the will, right? And you can reconcile it. If you need to need more to a child who maybe didn't earn what you earn, maybe someone worked in technology in Silicon Valley, right? And so tons of stock. It doesn't need that inheritance. But the point I'm going to make is you've got to have these dialogues and talk about it, because money is love and love is money, and the will is the final announcement of that. And so it's best to try and be equivalent in the will and figure out other ways to handle the disparate needs.
Oh, so well said, Lori. I come from 4 siblings and my dad was absolutely fair in every way. And he carried that through to the very end. And it made a huge difference. I've seen families where that didn't go down at all.
Right.
And siblings split up then after one parent
I
passes.
see it all the time that families break up over inequity in wills.
Right,
That
right.
can be avoided to a large extent. I'm not here to be a psychological counselor and deal with all the crazinesses in families, because everybody has their unique issues. But if you have a reasonable family situation and you are engaged in trying to help them understand why you might be leaving more to one versus the other, you'll have a much better, higher probability of successfully transitioning without the anger and resentment. Yeah.
Absolutely. So Lori, before we turn our attention to questions from the audience, and audience, please do keep them coming in the Q&A button, please. We started this conversation talking about the M word and the conversation that families need to have. Do you think that family members should prepare for their money talks? And what do you mean by preparing the outer landscape?
Yeah, so that goes back to one of the steps, right? Preparing the outer landscape, meaning how to figure out how to conduct those money talks, right? So you usually want to have an agenda. You want to share it with the siblings, give them an opportunity, or the family members involved, give them an opportunity to give you some feedback to help shape the conversation. But you literally need to organize your thoughts, and you just have I call it the what, who, when, where, why, and how. And you can do this if you want to include a third party, which I highly recommend. You can shape that conversation with that person's input and help them be a part of that conversation, because a third party influence is going to help keep people on track, right? People are going to be less likely to act out if you have a third party who brings a rational point of view and everybody respects in the room, and everyone decides to behave like adults. So, at the end of the day, the how is the most important piece of it, but it requires you doing a lot of homework before. Yeah. So
That's right. Families are complicated. They may not be like the Roy family in Succession, but every family has their stuff, right?
absolutely. Yes. And it's helpful to bring in somebody who doesn't have that stuff but understands what it is, and who's, Susie acts out on this issue and Jimmy is jealous of Susie, whatever. We all have these families with those kinds of dynamics. Yeah.
Oh, we do. We do. All right, Lori, we've got some great questions from the audience, so let's turn our attention that way.
Okay.
Here's a really good question. Thank you for sending in. The writer says, my daughter is 7 years old And I'd like to know the best way to give her an allowance. I don't want her to be greedy after she gets money by doing chores. How do you deal with what to give and when to start?
Well, 7 sounds a little bit early, but if you have a child who seems pretty mature, I mean, look, every household's different. I mean, at the minimum, maybe your 7-year-old daughter can make her bed and clean up her room, and you figure out what seems to be a reasonable allowance. Look, the allowance could also include buying lunches at school. So it's the opportunity to think about what things cost, what the need is, how do we reflect that, and what kind of participation can the kid make in terms of helping out. And it does teach your kids responsibility associated with money. Money doesn't just grow on trees, right? We all know that. And so you want to teach your kids healthy habits around money, and it be a role model about how you can acquire money, how you can use it, and how you can manage it. And Rockefeller had this concept where he would give each one of his kids $1 or $10 or whatever it was, and it had to be divided in 3 ways: part to save, part to invest, and the third part was to give to charity. I mean, that kind of protocol helps kids understand the different ways to use money, and gets them starting to think about how to manage it. So every family is different, but you could create something that fits within your family and your budget and helps your kids start to understand the value. Yeah.
All right, thank you for that. Great answer, Lori. So again, talking about when is the right time to do things with our children, the writer asks, can you speak to how to talk with teenagers about money before they have a job? My child is 14.
Talk to teenagers about money before they have a job. That's
Yeah.
the question, right? Well, yeah, of course, because look, look, you go to the grocery store, right? You're buying groceries. You bring home the groceries. You show your kids what you got for it. You give them a sense of what things are costing, right? You start to help them understand. So they see, you start to share with them some of the expenses that go along with it. I mean, certainly you don't have to have a job to become responsible about money. I mean, the allowance is a great way to sort of illustrate that. But having a job is a great way, and of course, having a part-time job when the kids are young is really, really helpful. I don't know how that works in your neighborhood, right? But we do see kids. One of my kids worked part-time at a hospital when he was in high school. So he could have extra spending money, but associating work with earning money is another skill set. So if they earn the money, and it's a lot different if they earn it than if you give it, right? So, or if you pay for it. So when they earn it, they start to really develop a sense of what things cost and how far it will go, and understand the limitations of money. And so we have kids in our neighborhood that still have lemonade stands, right? And I always stop, and I'm going to support that. I always thank the mother for doing it. I think it's just a great exercise. But yeah, there are ways to teach your kids without them having a job, because they're watching you. They're watching you even before they're teenagers. They're learning about how you do. So that's very important for you to model good behavior around money management. Yeah.
Absolutely. And here in Silicon Valley, maybe mom or dad standing next to the kid. But Lori, it also depends. I think you would say, again, we have a very diverse community here where we are based, and some kids are going to jobs and they are contributing money to the household budget. Some
Right.
are able to use the money on what they want to use it for themselves. Do you think it makes a difference, or does it just depend upon the family?
Well, look, if the family needs, every family economics are different, right?
Right.
So when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of money floating around. So I felt the need to go out and have a part-time job so I could buy the things that I had an early independent streak in me. I wanted to have my own money, right? So it
Yeah.
depends on the family circumstances and the individual kid, right? So I think, those are skills that they can learn. But it's if you need your child to earn extra money to contribute, that's a whole nother set of dynamics. And then the question, what is the appropriate job that they should have? I mean, it depends on the age, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but I think there are plenty of opportunities to to find ways to earn money at a fairly early age, to contribute to the household as well. So yeah, it's really a function of the family, economics and dynamics, et cetera. Yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah, I have a friend who had a lot of siblings, and the dad required all of the kids to work in fast food, at least for one summer, so that they understood what the work was like, and that they understood that getting money wasn't easy and it took work. And they were all actually in the end glad to do that.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can instill work ethic in your kids very young, very, very early on. And, you don't have to go work in a fast food store. I worked in a local boutique store, right? But there are plenty of opportunities for jobs. And, I think, I think we as a society oftentimes lose sight of the importance of teaching kids the importance of work and how work is an ethic can lead to value in your life and purpose in your life. And there are families who have multiples of millions who have kids who don't have any purpose or value,
Yeah.
right, about money. But there are those where they're instilled educationally and by good parenting and good role modeling that regardless of economics, work is important. And whatever economics you're in, it's a good lesson for kids to learn. And I think my kids learned it. And I didn't tell them to go out and get jobs. They just figured that I was a little tight. I wasn't going to give them everything they wanted. And it was what you needed versus what you want. And so if they wanted something that beyond what we were prepared to provide, they went out and got jobs. And I think that's a great lesson for kids early on. Yeah.
I do too. Thank you. Excellent answer. All right, back to the sandwich generation for a minute. This writer is asking about her mother or his mother, who's not financially talkative or always making the best decisions. They
Right.
want to talk about transferring money and how it will affect kids, but how does a how does a Gen Xer talk to their baby boomer mother about money and planning?
Yeah, the boomers are a little tight-lipped by nature, and they learned that from their parents who didn't talk at all about money. So,
Right.
I always say if you're going to engage in the conversation, make it about them. I was on a Zoom call with a woman out of the University of Pennsylvania, and she told me up front that when she wanted to approach her mom, she asked, mom, because her mom is starting to age and ail a bit, becoming forgetful or whatever. And so she opened the conversation by asking, Mom, what do you want? What do you want to see happen if you get to a place where you need help from those of us who love you and are around you? And you have to put yourself in their shoes, because as people age, their biggest fear, I've got to lose control. I'm going to lose the ability to take care of myself, right? I may have too much or I may have too little. There's all kinds of trust and control issues. So literally, the best way, this was a Gen Xer, right? Talking to yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think, and that is such a great example, because I find that the younger people want to have these dialogues and they're willing to do it, but you got to do it gently and you got to plant seeds. And, if your boomer mom is not ready for whatever reason, don't shut the conversation down. Just say, I would love to talk to you about this when you're ready, and we want to be there for you when you have those needs. And just know that we're here for you. Put yourself in their shoes, I guess, right? And
Yeah,
yeah, and of course you could, if you don't have success with that, oftentimes that third party, like
yeah,
maybe there's somebody in the family that mom will listen to better than you. Maybe you create an ally in that person, or you reach out to that person. But it has to be the right time and the right person, I think, to do that. And boomers are a tough crowd. But I will say what's going on right now, there's a generational transfer taking place from boomers to millennials and Gen X's, et cetera, Gen X, millennials, et cetera. So this is an opportune moment for the dialogues to start to take place if they haven't already. And and of course you can open that conversation by making it about them. If something happens that concerns you, I'm concerned that you forgot your keys, or you couldn't get in the house, or you locked yourself out.
yeah.
We I'd like to have that conversation about how we can help. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So Lori, we're getting close to the end of our time together, but we have a couple of related questions. These are really good ones. So I want
Okay,
to make sure we hit them. The first question is, how do I find a financial advisor who's a good fit for our family?
right.
Secondly, how do I find an affordable financial advisor?
Those are great questions. So I have a whole, not that I'm promoting my book too much here today, but I have a whole chapter on how to find a good advisor, how to find the right advisor for you. And, I talk about all the different credentials that are out there and how you might seek out from friends and family and other professionals or go online. I had somebody find me from Mexico looking for very specific criteria. So it requires you thinking through, asking yourself, what do I need? What kind of topics do I need somebody to have expertise around, right? And I need to find somebody that I'll be comfortable with from a chemistry standpoint. So you obviously have to meet this person, but there's a whole laundry list of questions you need to ask to be able to make sure, and making sure that it's affordable for you based on your circumstances is key. And there's a whole range of advisors out there that work with different levels of wealth. The most important thing is for you to find the one that's the best fit for you. And then you ask about, what do you charge? I mean, most people think that, financial advisors are out of their reach. But believe me, there are plenty of advisors for every person out there. And making sure you understand how they get compensated, whatever fees or commissions are charged, that's really an important question for you to ask. But I don't know this person who's asking the question, but I'm certain they'll be able to find somebody that's affordable and that can take care of what their needs are. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Lori. So again, everybody, we've come to the end of our 45 minutes together, but Lori, I want to ask you, what is the best way for people to find you? If somebody has a question that we didn't answer today, or they just want to reach out about your book, where should they find information?
Well, okay, so I work for this major company and there's compliance and legal, and it's a separation of church and state situation. So I can't really give out my cell phone. I can't really give my work situation out. However, if you Google my name, Lori Sackler, you will come up with my office number. And I would be happy if anybody has a question that didn't get asked, or they want to follow up on an issue they might be having with, I can maybe provide some insights. Please feel free to reach out to me. That'd be great. Or you can send me an email to my work as well. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, thank you, Lori Sackler. I want to let everybody know that Lori is here today pro bono. This is part of her really community service for all of us across the nation who are parents and family members looking for advice about money and the M word. So Lori, thank you for today's wonderful conversation. This was incredibly valuable.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun too. And I hope it was meaningful, and whoever is out there today picked up at least one or two ideas.
Look at all these floating hearts and clapping hands.
Oh, that makes me feel good. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lori, for joining us today. We hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye, everybody, for now.